Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to the Malta Business Network webinar series. My name is Peter Young-Grek, and I'm the CEO of Brandwagon, a brand transformation consultancy and one of the board members of the local chapter of MBN. I'm honored to be your host for this afternoon, which happens to be the very first webinar of 2022. Today, we shall be covering the subject of mobility. But before we get started, let me share some stats. Car sales are up and electric vehicle sales are up. According to the auto industry tracker Mark Lines, as the global economy recovered strongly through 2021, car sales have started to rebound too, globally by up 4% in 2021, making up part of the huge drop they experienced in 2020 due to the COVID pandemic. Electric car sales have also continued to show the resilience to volatility in the wider car market. In a few car markets, such as Germany, they're above 34%, the UK 28%, France 23%, and China 18%. To date, around 34 countries have announced policies that set a future deadline for banning new registrations of ICE cars, ICE, internal combustion engine cars, that is. This has been accompanied by announcements from auto car makers such as Ford, Volkswagen, and General Motors of plans to phase out ICE cars from their production lines forever. To mark the transition to electric vehicles, but with a local perspective, the subject of today's event is sustainable mobility, walking the talk. The advantages, disadvantages, insights, and key learnings learned from the start of eCabs' transition towards electric vehicles. Our speaker for today is Dr. Andrew Bezzina. Andrew is one of the co-founders of eCabs, which he started just after returning from reading a master's degree in corporate law at the University College of London. He is a father, a runner, and a lifelong learner committed to reducing the company's carbon footprint and transforming eCabs' fleet of 200 plus vehicles to EVs in the next 5 years. Thankfully, he's very tenacious, collected, and loves to bring order into the chaos. Andrew, in your hands.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Peter, Tony Farrugia, and Mr. Zamit Tabana for this invite. A few weeks ago, I got a call from Tony asking me what we're up to at eCabs, which would be a bit interesting to share with an audience. I told him that my brother Matthew was fully focused on kickstarting the internationalization aspirations of the eCabs platform, whereas I, apart from overseeing the local operation, I was also responsible for overseeing a plan to ensure that the eCabs platform rids itself of ICE vehicles by 2025. Taking you back to March 2020, as we all know, March 2020 changed the trajectory of many businesses the world over, including ours. In many ways, COVID reset our thinking around the boardroom table, and this new reality saw us reprioritize, amongst many other things, our vision towards a long-term, sustainable and cleaner platform in line with our ESG agenda. Exactly a year later, we launched a pilot project where we invested in a multi-branded EV fleet. We have Peugeots, Citroëns, Kias, and Hyundais, in order to test and determine the commercial suitability of an EV fleet on the challenging Maltese road network, but more importantly, in a 24/7 setup. What do I mean by a 24/7 setup? A 24/7 setup means that a vehicle can easily clock anywhere between 400 to 450 kilometers over a given 24-hour period. We pledged to have a local operation that is run by electrics and hybrids by 2025. Let's also appreciate that this is no mean feat, and it presents many challenges and relies on multiple stakeholders, not only pulling the same rope, but as we have learned and experienced over the past year, pulling that same rope in the same direction. Going forward, I would like to go make a run through of what this pilot project, the opportunities and challenges of this pilot project that have been brought to light over the past year or so. When it comes to opportunities, initial capital outlay for EV vehicles is usually an EV vehicle. To purchase an EV vehicle is usually 15,000 euros more expensive than a normal ICE vehicle. However, thanks to the very generous government grants and also the scrappage scheme, this substantial cost increase is nullified when one had to factor in government grant plus the scrappage scheme. I dare say that today, because of the fact that the government has increased the grant from 8,000 euros to 12, there are instances where the actual cost of purchasing an EV is cheaper than that of a standard ICE vehicle. The only challenge that remains is the fact that when it comes to government grants, this grant is not immediately and automatically deducted from the purchase price, but it needs to be applied for in the form of a rebate once the purchase actually takes place. This administrative process usually takes anywhere between 3 to 6 months. Moving on to operating expenditure, after 10 months, we test covered around about 150,000 kilometers, consuming 18,000 kilowatts of electricity. What does this translate to in essence? From a purely environmental standpoint, we saved 6 tons plus of CO2 emissions. But moving on to the monetary side, because I'm sure that even though we are all environmentalists at heart, but we tend to also look at the financials. From a purely monetary standpoint, our fuel bill was slashed by around about 60-65%.
Andrew, I'm just going to stop you for a second. Would you like me to share your presentation, to start sharing the presentation?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
You've done a great work on this presentation, and I don't want to stop it over here. I went straight away onto this slide since you're talking about operating expenditure.
Okay. In simple terms, for every €1 of diesel consumed by an ICE vehicle, an EV vehicle only consumes 35 cents of electricity for the same distance covered. So just to rephrase a bit, 8 cents of diesel cover 1 kilometer of distance, but you only need 2.8 cents of electricity to cover that same distance. Maintenance and servicing costs are also marginally down as of to date. I do not really want to bore you down with numbers and stats. However, I would like to share the next slide with you just to give you a comparative of what a 5-year cycle comparing an ICE vehicle an ICE vehicle to an EV would translate to. Pete, I don't know if it's the next slide, not this one. This one. So basically over here, I took all the separate line items of running an EV and running an ICE vehicle. I also included the cost of capital, which over a 5-year period would replace depreciation. So when it comes to the cost of capital, as you can see, an EV, which is in this case, I'm comparing the Peugeot E2008 with the standard Peugeot station wagon, which is a diesel run vehicle. When it comes to the cost of capital, as you can see, the cost of an 2008 is around about 15,000 euros, including the government grant and the scrappage scheme, whereas that of a Peugeot 308 standard ICE vehicle is 22,000 euros, excluding VAT in both cases. Insurance costs are the same. And over here, I would like to make a comment in passing that insurance companies should maybe start considering offering more attractive insurance premium when it comes to insuring EVs, thus making it more interesting for the people out there to purchase any vehicle, EV vehicle. Licensing costs, a standard ICE vehicle, we pay around about 125 euros a year. But when it comes to EV, for the first 5 years, there are no licensing costs. Car servicing and maintenance, marginal decrease in costs over a 5-year period. Spare parts, practically the same. However, in the case of spare parts, when it comes to EVs, for the sake of prudence, we're assuming that in the 3rd, 4th year, out of a 5-pack module, we would be replacing 2 of those modules in the battery pack. So over here, we're assuming that we would be incurring a 10,000 euro expense to replace 2 out of the 5 modules in a battery pack. This doesn't mean that it's going to happen, but for the sake of prudence, as I said, we're taking this into account. Fuel, very clear over there. The cost to run an EV is substantially lower than that to run a normal ICE vehicle. These prudent estimates, if one had to look at the eCabs fleet, at a 100+ vehicle fleet, on an annual basis, we would be saving around about 600 tons of CO2 emissions. An 800,000 euro fuel bill annually would change into a 300,000 energy bill. That's a 500,000 cost saving measure. When it comes to car servicing, maintenance, and spare parts, we also calculate that there should be a cost saving measure of around about 700K on an annual basis. These numbers are pretty significant, and as every CFO in the room would appreciate, these are game-changing numbers in my opinion. This brings me to the next point. Today, eCabs also accepts on its platform partner drivers, and today these number more than 1,000+. What is a partner driver? In simple terms, a partner driver is a self-employed driver who purchases his own vehicle or leases out his own vehicle, hooks onto a ride-hailing platform, accepts rides from that ride-hailing platform, and in return pays a commission rate to the platform for the rides that he or she receives. Essentially today, eCabs runs a similar operational model to the likes of Bolt, Uber, and Lyft. Because of this, we have launched a fiscal incentives for these partner drivers to pay a reduced commission rate when it comes to eco ride. In this way, we're making a direct financial contribution towards the attainment of the goals I mentioned earlier. In doing so, we also have added a more fiscal incentive for partner drivers to invest in cleaner vehicles, thus making it possible for us to push forward this decommissioning of ICE vehicles to EVs by 2025. These are the opportunities. I'll now move on to the challenges that we came across over this 12-month pilot project. As expected, no project of the sort comes without its challenges. The largest challenge of all we collectively face as a nation actually revolves around the country's charging infrastructure, with vehicle range coming into play. Between all the EV brands that we have in our fleet, our best performing EV gives us around about 340 kilometers of range. Compare that to a standard ICE vehicle, which gives us on a full tank of fuel 800 kilometers of range. That's 60% less in range. From an operational standpoint, one would need to charge an EV daily, whereas when it comes to ICE vehicles, refueling needs to happen anywhere between every 2 to 3 days. Even the time it takes to refuel varies substantially. It only takes us 3 minutes to refuel a nice vehicle because we have a fuel tank on our premises, but it takes us 8 to 10 hours to recharge an EV vehicle. On a positive note, come April, May, we would be introducing an EV to our fleet, which should be improving on range. Actually, this EV promises to give more than 500 kilometers of range, and we hope that this improvement in range will help operations run more smoothly. Having said that, science shows that the long-term solution comes in the form of both fast and normal charging cycles for a healthy battery life. Let's appreciate over here that battery manufacturers do not push for fast charging on a daily basis. Actually, they do not cover battery warranties are not extended for fast charging being done on a daily basis. Over and above that, when it comes to battery warranties, one would also need to factor in the fact that EV vehicles are covered by a warranty for an 8-year period or 160,000 kilometers at max, whichever comes first. So that means that in our case, battery warranty is over after a year and a half from the date of purchase. When it comes to charging infrastructure, I like to draw a distinction between public charging infrastructure and private charging infrastructure. It is my opinion that when it comes to the country's charging infrastructure, it would be best planned if fast charging takes place on public space and 8 to 10 hour charge is carried out at base or in the case of private individuals in their own homes. This will, however, come with its own trade-offs as it will require existing parking spaces to be sacrificed. As we all know, parking spaces come in short supply, and as is expected, not every stakeholder is happy to commit to this new reality. If I had to take us as an example, unfortunately, to date, we haven't managed to convince the local council to give up 2 parking spaces just opposite our head office to make way for 2 public chargers. It's a pity, but this is the reality that we're living in currently. When it comes to private charging infrastructure, this also comes with its own challenges for large fleet operators like ourselves. There are limitations on how many chargers you can install on a standard 3-phase electricity meter. Fleet operators like us would have no other option but to invest in a substation which comes with a hefty investment of around 150,000 euros. However, in our case, outline plans have already been drawn up for an electricity substation at our logistics center, and discussions with the government have also confirmed plans for substations to be partially funded via grants or tax credits. Next slide. I also, during this 12-month period, we also have come to realize that there is a simmering challenge that, in my opinion, is not being given its due attention. Tradesmen such as mechanics, panel beaters, sprayers, and the like are all very, very relevant stakeholders in this shift towards electrification. As things stand today, from our experience, most of these tradesmen still view the shift towards EVs as a threat to their livelihoods. I tend to agree with them. This is very understandable. Thus, what we are suggesting is that we should be using this transitory period to make sure that these tradesmen are upskilled and, if need be, reskilled in anticipation to this eventual shift towards EVs. Truth be told, MCAST is already holding courses in EV repairs, and my own hope is that the uptake of these courses is encouraging. To conclude, not to bore you down with more stats, in my humble opinion, as a country, we need to be more serious about this vision towards this move towards electrification. With a growing population and with consumption on a constant long-term growth rate, we need to acknowledge that these important changes are an absolute must. This will require national commitment and the execution of a plan that does not change every 2 to 3 years like every other political cycle. Greenwashing and skin-deep changes will not cut it. A national transition towards EVs needs to be addressed at multiple levels involving all the stakeholders. As the main orchestra conductor, the government does not have it easy. However, important stakeholders also include the consumers, who ultimately affect demand and by default shape supply. Fleet operators like ourselves will need to continue investing. However, let's not make the mistake of pretending that the single efforts of a company will lead to this shift towards electrification. This shift towards electrification will need a concerted effort of all the stakeholders out there. Thank you very much.
Andrew, thank you very much for that presentation. I'm going to head straight into a couple of questions, so you can go back to unmuting yourself because the conversation is not over here. From a business standpoint, I mean, with us today, we've got a number of leaders following this webinar. And obviously, I mean, from my end, I applaud you for the decision taken and you know, the direction that you're taking your organization. I'm very interested to hear from you about the actual transformational experience. I mean, we all know change in any organization is hard, and approaching such a change also, you know, as the beginning of the pandemic came along, I mean, that brought about its own significant amount of challenges for you guys, as obviously tourism started to drop. The wish and the want for people to get into third-party cars obviously started to change. Could you talk to us a bit about that transition, the transformation, but within the organization? What did it take for you and the rest of your colleagues, the leadership at eCabs to take this big decision, you know, to go onto this journey? I'm keen to hear and also share your experience as an example to other leaders on this call.
What we wanted to do is, obviously, there are times where everybody tends to be very philosophical about things in life, and we said, listen, we need to take the plunge. Unless we're going out there to test it out, we will never know whether EVs can play a role in our operation. When we're looking at, you know, vehicle catalogs and reading about range, the truth of the matter remains that when it comes to the challenging Maltese road network, and as I said, a 24/7 operation, it needs to be tested out. I think it's also inevitable that this shift will one day have to happen. And as opposed to possibly to maybe other businesses, we like to be trendsetters ourselves as well. If it's something good, if it's something positive, we like to follow suit. However, in this case, we wanted to lead by example. Over here, I would like to go back in time And recall the time when other white plate garage operators like us wanted to purchase a vehicle. They used to go to Michael Attard Limited and ask him about how reliable the Peugeot 308 is. And his answer was, if it's good enough for eCabs, it should be good enough for you because they're clocking 120,000 kilometers a year, 150,000 kilometers a year. So it seems to be good. And I think when it comes to EVs, it will be a very similar process. If it's good enough for eCabs, how can Peter find an excuse not to shift to an EV? And this is the forma mentis we like to follow over here. We like to lead by example and try as much as possible to walk the talk when it comes to our environmental credentials. When I mentioned greenwashing before, I still believe that we're at a stage of greenwashing, and because at the end of the day, only a single-digit percentage of our fleet is green. So there's still a long way to go. However, there's a start. At least there's a start. Yeah. There's commitment. There's a plan, and in 2022 we'll be adding another 12 to 15 EVs to our fleet, and hopefully in 2023 we'll keep on increasing on and about. Parallel with that, we're also seeing a very encouraging uptake from our partner drivers. So today, out of 1,000 plus partner drivers, around 120 drive a hybrid or an EV, which is very encouraging. And we also hope that as time goes by, more partner drivers will decide to replace their current ICE vehicle with an EV.
Andrew, I'm going to jump straight in and bite on that hook of leading by example. But before I get to that, I want to share some other statistics, which I was looking at before this. So even though global electric car sales in 2021 were up and they were very optimistic, the truth is that SUV sales are actually set to be 5 times higher. Okay, the number of SUVs on the world's roads have increased by more than 35 million over the past 12 months alone. That's driving up CO2 emissions by 120 million tons. So there is a lot of interesting flex in terms of where we're going as business leaders about electrical vehicles and the importance of actually moving to a greener and more sustainable mobility shift. However, I think there's a lot more that needs to be done in terms of leading by example. As your role as a business leader, I think you've pretty much shown, your place in the world in terms of being innovative, going out and being different for the right sort of reasons. But obviously, what roles do other business leaders have? And also us as a parent, you're a parent, I'm a parent as well. In the habits changing paradigm, what should we be doing more of? What's your comment on that?
No, I think if I had to move into parent mode, I think, yes, we need to start leading by example, because as we all know, the minds of our kids, of our children are very supple and they tend to copy what we're doing. As I was discussing with you earlier, it only takes a trip down to St. Michael's School in the morning or in the afternoon to see what kind of example we're giving our children. I mean, the fact that, for example, the government is offering free school transport to all individuals, all children attending private and church schools, and add to that the fact that still there are parents out there. I mean, I'm sure there are very valid reasons for some parents to drive their children to school, but I'm also sure that there are a lot of parents that do so just because they want to do it. I mean, the fact that we're, for example, driving our children to school on a daily basis in a private vehicle goes to show how much we're leading by example. We tend to be very philosophical. We tend to present this multimodal concept as some kind of utopia. But when it comes to walking the talk, everyone is comfortable, sitting in his, private vehicle, driving from point A to point B. So we need this shift, this culture change is going to be painful. We need to accept it. But I think we owe it. Me today as a 30-year-old, 40-year-old, nearly a 40-year-old, I don't owe it to myself. I owe it to the next generation and the generation after that.
So,
I mean,
so Andrew, what should we be doing more? I mean, you're talking about, multimodality. But as you know, more than I do on a Sunday morning or even any time during the week. I mean, our roads are full of cars, and some cars which are practical and useful, and some cars which are also just extremely exciting to drive, or get stuck in traffic in. What else should Malta be doing? What can we do more?
I think what we should be doing is we should be planning our journeys better. So we should be questioning, do I really need to drive from point A to point B, or can I walk? Can I take a scooter? Can I take a cab? Can I take the bus? Having said that, we also need to admit that there is no, in my opinion, political will to change and to adopt the stick rather than the carrot at times. But the truth, in my opinion, the truth of the matter lies in the fact that at the end of the day, we tend to be Mediterranean by nature. And unless this change starts to, we start to feel the pinch in our pockets, I think we will keep on postponing it year after year after year. So let's take, for example, parking as an example. As long as parking on a public Maltese road remains free, then it's very difficult for you to ditch the Maltese, to ditch your private car, because if you're going around St. Julian's and you can park in a white box and pay nothing for that, then why should you walk it? So what is the opportunity cost of that public space, of that parking space? It could be a wider pavement. It could be an avenue full of trees. It could be a bicycle lane. I mean, just look at the stretch of road from McDonald's St. Julian's in Spinola to eCabs office, to what we refer to as the Golden Mile in Malta. Yeah. Try and walk it. After you do so, look back and say, was it a pleasant experience? No, it's not. So how can you convince me as a private individual to ditch my car and start walking from my apartment in St. Julian's to work, which is also in St. Julian's? So and Andrew, that's why I said it involves all the stakeholders. We need a push from all fronts: the consumer, the government, business leaders, everyone.
So
everyone
Andrew, in practical terms, but Andrew, I mean, the talks of an election are close. Whether they're going to be happening over the next 3 months or over the next 6 or over the next 12, we'll see about that. The minister is in front of you asking you to give him, give me 10 things that we need to do and what we need to change. What would they be? Give us your top 3, huh? Let's not get stuck on 10.
What I would advise a transport minister would be, first thing, do not seek re-election. If you want to really take hard decisions, do not seek re-election. As long as you're there to be re-elected, then we're stuck in a whirlwind of repeating the same mistakes over again. The only transport minister that would be able to take the hard decisions would be someone who's a technocrat and who wouldn't be looking forward or who wouldn't be looking to be re-elected in the next political cycle. What he would be driven by his legacy. He would want the electorate to look back 20 years from today and realize that this particular individual had the guts, had the balls to take decisions that were painful, because they're going to be painful. I mean, imagine asking people to pay for parking. Crazy. Suicide, political suicide in Malta. It will lead to political suicide in Malta. We're all complaining about congestion, the private car, pollution. Start penalizing parking and you'll start addressing the problem.
So political suicide is number 1. Charging for parking is number 2. But let's look at the long-term opportunities. I mean, surely when we look at a country as small as Malta and the opportunities that we have ahead of us, I mean, there's a huge opportunity in turning Malta into a proper green nation in the middle of the Mediterranean. And it sure does sound like a utopia right now, but I think 20 years from now, so if you're approaching your 40s, when you're 60, okay, and you look back, I mean, sure, there's a massive appeal in terms of the tourism product that this nation could offer if we really had to turn it into a greener nation. Now, let's forget for a second, what the jump into 20 years time is going to be. Let's look at the brand appeal. Let's look at the appeal that organizations who are taking significant transformational changes within their organizations can see. I mean, what is your advice to other organizations who are maybe discussing at board level, the shift? I mean, it is about time that a lot of more organizations do this, courageous shift, if you wish, from their end. What are the things that you think that they should be considering? What are the things that, I mean, you went into a test approach. Any other learnings you could share with other organizational leaders?
As I said, if you had to totally disregard the environmental aspect from a financial point of view, it seems, because we haven't covered the 5-year cycle, but it seems the numbers seem to make sense. So it's cheaper to run an electric vehicle when you're comparing it to an ICE vehicle. Yes, there are government grants. Yes, there are a lot of incentives. However, purely from a monetary standpoint, I mean, there's nothing to think about. In our case, we're reluctant because we're so heavily dependent. We clock so many kilometers that we cannot, switch from ICE to EVs in air. So it has to be a gradual process. But if you're running a 5-vehicle fleet and you're only using those vehicles for 4 hours every day, let's say you have a fleet of vehicles for salesmen or for salespersons, and they're clocking 50, 60, 100 kilometers on a daily basis. The range is enough, and overnight you're charging those EVs at base. So there's nothing really to think twice about. There is an element of unknown when it comes to the battery packs and the challenges that might come with it. But this reminds me of the whole vaccine debate. Unless it's pure, we're not willing to take the plunge. I think at the end of the day, as business leaders, we're risk takers as well, I assume. And as risk takers, this could be another risk. But it could be a risk also for the common good, as a country, as a nation in general. So yes, I think I tend to agree with you. We're still lagging behind compared to our European counterparts when it comes to EVs. I mean, if you look at what Norway is doing, what Switzerland is doing, what Luxembourg is doing, we're way, 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 way behind. And the question is why? Why?
Are there any specific things that we could learn about from these nations, Andrew, like some actual specifics that you would suggest? I mean, we were having a discussion a couple of days ago about, the lack of charges even at, for example, public places like the airport, supermarkets, other places as well. I mean, what else should we be doing to really try and encourage, even from a business standpoint to a certain extent? I mean, car parks of supermarkets are private. So there is a huge opportunity for organizations to get involved here.
What I would, for example, I think we're missing the education element. So I think there needs to be more propaganda on this electrification concept. People don't really understand it. As I said, if today I'm having a chat with one of our mechanics, the first thing they tell you if you ask them, listen, what do you think about EVs? Is vintage. Don't even think about it. Why? Because it's a threat to their livelihoods. So it's understandable. So I think from an education point of view, I think more can be done to educate people on the need, but also on the advantages of making this shift. From a planning point of view, for example, I'm still not seeing, even though I know that there is an EU directive and it should start being enforced pretty soon in Malta. For example, when it comes to public car parks, huge car parks, 50 plus parking space, we're not preparing. These car parks are still not being prepared with the necessary charging infrastructure. So we're building new car parks minus what we need in five years from today. So if I had to take, for example, the Hyatt car park, 50 meters away from our office, and I'm just mentioning so that I can give tangible examples. There's no charging infrastructure. It's a 300 plus car park, bang in the middle of St. Julian's. No charging infrastructure. What's going to happen 2-3 years from today when there are more people using EVs, driving down to St. Julian's, parking in the Hyatt car park, and wanting to charge their vehicles whilst they're shopping at Bay Street, for example? So we're not ready. We're not ready. Why isn't the PA imposing that charging infrastructure should be part of the conditions when you are giving a permit for a car park? Plain and simple. We don't really need to reinvent the wheel. We just copy and paste what's already being done abroad, in my opinion. I know it's easier said than done, but when you really think about it, I mean, this is not rocket science. Come on.
Yeah. Andrew, I think we're getting close to the end of today's session. I just wanted to kind of get a quick roundup from you in terms of, you've done all this. It's not very far from 2025 in business terms. We're 3 years away. There's a massive, massive ambition that you've got there as eCabs, which I thought, oh yeah. Depends on the months that we're counting. Fair enough. How positive are you? How optimistic you are, in achieving this? And what are the next big steps for you? And then we'll close off the chat.
No, we're very confident that we will reach the target. However, as I said, we need all the different stakeholders to play ball. We cannot alone if there aren't sufficient public chargers in strategic public spaces. We cannot. I mean, we calculate that if we have a 200 plus vehicle fleet, we would need 50-60 chargers on our premises. Possible, but you still need help from public chargers so that when drivers are at the airport waiting for you to pick you up, those 10 minutes can be utilized in an intelligent way and the driver can charge his vehicle. So the different stakeholders need to come together. Education, as I said, is key as well. We need to upskill our mechanics to make sure that they are ready for this eventual shift towards electrification. They need to know how to deal with an EV and how to repair an EV. But yes, I think it's still doable. There are other fleet operators abroad that have committed. I mean, the likes of Uber, Bolt, Lyft, that have also undertaken this commitment. So I think why should we be any different? If they're capable of doing it, we can do it as well. We have nothing less.
Absolutely. Andrew, I applaud you. I also wish you all the very, very best of resilience and and the right wisdom to get to this amazing goal. What I'd like to kind of close up before we just end today's conversation is that I think there's a lot of big learnings over here. I think number one learning would be education. I think that we need to be able to get involved, continue to learn, and also teach the rest of our sort of organizations, but also our kids as well, about the information. We need to go out there and get the right information to be able to talk about it and have actually informed conversations and decisions. We hear a lot of conversations happening. How many of those conversations are actually informed? So I'll remind our members that you heard it over here first. I think the second thing is planning. Obviously, in every single business, I think we all know the famous adage: if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So from a perspective of planning, I think this is great, but also I call out, to the powers that be to get involved more into the planning of this great nation and how we can turn it around to become definitely a bit more sustainable. I think there's also a very, very important part over here in terms of collaboration and business collaboration. The Malta Business Network survives, on the collaboration and the opportunities that it presents its members with. There are a number of people on this call today who I know can actually support you in this plan. So people who who already own, big properties, who maybe a number of your customers live in, or you pass by, who could actually reach out and offer, this as a big business opportunity, besides just being, an opportunity for collaboration. So I think that's important. I think that we as business leaders need to take that responsibility in our hands. And finally, obviously, it is leading by example. And I think that I think you're setting the example really well over here. And I go out there and encourage others to continue to lead by example. And I thank everybody for joining us today.
But I would add
Go ahead.
Political consensus on thorny issues. Unless we get that right, unfortunately, it will take us longer to get where we need to be. We need political consensus on something which is as thorny as transport, something as thorny as mobility. We live in a small country. We suffer from not in my backyard syndrome. It's a densely populated country. So when it comes to transport, when it comes to mobility, we need political consensus for this country to move forward.
And I think that's a great call out there to everybody listening on this call, to put some pressure out there to make change happen. And of course, let's continue to be the change that we want to see. With that, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. Andrew, thank you so much for your time and for putting so much effort into today's presentation. We look forward to hosting everybody at the next Malta Business Network webinar. We'll be sending out emails shortly to our members. For those of you who decided to join today but are not yet members, please feel free to reach out on our website or on Facebook or on LinkedIn, and we'll speak to you about setting up your membership. And have yourselves a great evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you.